Charles, let me start with you. It's like I know you have little kids. It's like the little wave that, you set up your toddler, you let him play, give him a toy, he can splash around in that kind of a wave. There's absolutely no threat of death or destruction. But it certainly wasn't tidal. And I don't even think it was all that decent for a body surf.
No, I do agree. I think we had a tsunami in Florida and then it just stopped. It didn't move any further up the coast or across the country. With the exception of Florida, which I think we have to treat separately, think this was a disaster for Republicans relative to expectations, relative to the political environment. I mean, certainly my predictions were wrong, but my predictions were informed by a couple of things. The first was the polling, and the second was being in Florida. And, if you live in this environment, this atmosphere, it's hard to imagine in a state that DeSantis won by 20 that Republicans aren't going to win by, 1 in Pennsylvania. I just don't think there's any sugarcoating it. I've seen some people try to put silver linings up for grabs. I think this was a huge loss. I mean, if you had said to any political analyst a year ago, you're going to have nearly 10% inflation, you're going to have a president who's deeply unpopular, you're going to have the voting public split on which party is more extreme, which party is more of a threat, and so on and so forth. And then you would show them these numbers, they'd have said, no, that doesn't add up. I think there are a number of reasons for it, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my takeaway is this is a big catastrophe for Republicans, and they need to look at why it happened.
Not to mention, you've got over 2/3 of the electorate saying the country's heading in the wrong direction. And so did they vote for change? Not really. So what direction exactly do we need to go in? Remaining unclear too. Jeremy, what did you make of it?
I mean, I think you hit it right on the head there, Megyn. I mean, the country is so closely divided. This is what happens when you have two deeply unpopular options. It reminds me a lot of what we saw in 2016 between Trump and Hillary Clinton. It was another very, very closely divided count, and neither candidate was very palatable to the American people. I think one of the things that I took away from the results last night, and they're still coming in, obviously, but you have to wonder if Republicans are somehow a victim of believing their own hype, right? All we heard in the media and mostly right-wing media, leading up to this election was, Biden is basically the Weekend at Bernie's candidate being propped up by AOC. John Fetterman is a zombie. The economy is so terrible, and crime in big cities and homelessness is so out of control that the Democrats are just in for an utter wipeout. And that didn't happen. That doesn't mean, though, that all the news in here is good news for Democrats. And you mentioned New York. I think that's a perfect place to start, right? In New York, Democrats underperformed. Kathy Hochul will be reelected, but with a much smaller majority than any governor has had in recent history in New York. You had Sean Patrick Maloney lose his seat. And across the country in Los Angeles, you have a mayoral race where a former Republican could very likely win. It's very tight. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but there are still examples in these results, despite the repudiation of Republicans pretty much across the board. There's still some examples you could point to where it reveals an unease, I think, with the overall direction and perception of the Democratic Party.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that, because I have been trying to figure out whether this is one of those right-left media cycles that went awry. But my belief is that pretty much everyone was predicting a GOP big night. The size of the bigness was what was under debate. The Democrats were worried that it was going to be huge. The Republicans were hoping that it would be. But you look at Cooke Political Report, you look at 538, you look at RCP, they were all predicting GOP pickups, big pickups in the House and the Senate, and the range was between net 1, like taking control of the Senate, versus plus 3 or 4 for the most optimistic prognosticator. So it wasn't like there was that one team, like MSNBC was like, no way, the GOP is going to lose, I'm telling you. And Fox was saying the opposite. There seemed to be a general agreement. This is going to be a very strong night for the GOP. And then it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good point. Certainly, I mean, you look at my publication, there were a lot of stories about the Democrats being in big troubles. Certainly this was not the commentary that Republicans were going to have a good night was not exclusive to conservative media. I think, the sense of how much of a runaway victory it appeared to be on the horizon was kind of overstated there. I will say, though, and this may be surprising to some of your listeners, Megyn, but the polls toward the end, and I was talking to a very smart Republican strategist about this morning, the polls were actually pretty correct in some key races. The Fetterman race being a good example. They had him up very slightly over Oz. That ended up being the case. In Nevada, it showed, neck and neck. That is certainly the case. In Wisconsin, it had Ron Johnson up just a little bit. And in Arizona, it had Kari Lake up just a tiny bit. Now, we'll see what happens there. My sources say that it's still possible Kari Lake pulls it out. They also say that in Nevada, it seems less likely that the Republican Senate candidate will win there. But by and large, unlike what we saw in 2020, in 2018, 2016, the polls did better this time, especially the ones toward the end. I think, at least in the words of one strategist I was talking to earlier today, they didn't want to believe it because the polls had been so wrong before. So that's what made, I think, Republicans.
It could have been a situation for the GOP where if this election happened 1 week earlier, they would have done better. Like at the very last day or two, they were inching more Dem. And we talked about it on the show yesterday, but there was that final NBC News poll that showed equal enthusiasm amongst Democrats and Republicans. And now it was an outlier based on about 4 or 5 polls total, but it was the most recent, and it was showing an evening up in enthusiasm. And certainly that was on display last night. So, Charles, this morning, lots of recriminations. We had thought the recriminations would be on the Dem side, right? Because they were already starting that yesterday. Like, our messaging stinks and we're going to have to regroup. No, it's the opposite today. And most of what I'm seeing on Twitter from conservatives, from MAGA, lovers, and so on, they're all taking a hard look at Trump. I mean, Trump, once again, is at the center of the discussion.
And he should be, because he is the establishment now within the Republican Party. He wasn't in 2015. He ran against it. He lambasted it. He saw himself as an insurgent. But he's now the establishment. And that means that he is in some way responsible for the party's direction. He sees himself as being the head of the party. He sees himself as the presumptive nominee in 2024. He started preemptively trying to dissuade anyone from running against him by either threatening them or telling them to wait. And he chose a lot of these candidates in the way that the establishment used to. Now, people will say, yes, but the primary voters had to acquiesce to his decisions. That's true. But that was also true of the establishment 2008 and 2012. The establishment made its recommendations and primary voters went along with it. That's what we saw here with Trump. It's what we saw in Georgia. It's what we saw in Ohio. It's what we saw in Pennsylvania. And I think candidate quality really matters in Senate and gubernatorial races. We knew this. We probably forgot this to some extent, myself included. I looked at the political environment. I looked at some of the late-breaking polls, and I thought that the liabilities that Herschel Walker had and that Dr. Oz had might be irrelevant in the face of public anger with inflation, crime, and so on. 6 months ago, I didn't think that. 6 months ago, I was saying, look, these candidates are weak and they could lose winnable races. And sure enough, most of those candidates lost winnable races. And the candidates who actually delivered for their constituents, the candidates who had a track record, the candidates who in some cases were prepared to take on Trump, I'm thinking in particular of Brian Kemp and Mike DeWine, did really, really well. And it just shows that, yes, there is a lot here to explain what happened last night. And obviously, I'm still not entirely sure myself. We still don't have final numbers in the House or the Senate. But there is an obvious discrepancy between the bad candidates and the good candidates. J.D. Vance won in Ohio. He would have had to do a great deal of work to lose in Ohio, given where Ohio is right now. But he won by 14 points less than Governor DeWine. In Georgia, Brian Kemp seems to have won by about 8. Herschel Walker is 1 point down on Senator Warnock, and that's going to go to a runoff.
Like many people, I am eating healthier these days, and that is why I love good olive oil. It's a treat, and you need it, so why not get the best? And by good olive oil, the best, I mean fresh. Olive oil packs the most flavor and the healthiest nutrients when it's fresh from the farm. But that's the problem with supermarket olive oils. They're not fresh. They're not right from the farm. They can sit on the shelf for many months growing stale. That's why I like my olive oil direct from small, award-winning farms, thanks to a guy named TJ Robinson, also known as the olive oil hunter. When I first tasted TJ's farm fresh oils, I was like, this is going to be like a regular oil. What do you mean? What's the difference in olive? Wrong. That is when I realized how important fresh is. You, like me, you will fall in love with their vibrant, delicious flavors. They are delicious on salad, on veggies, pasta, meat, fish, you name it. And as an introduction to his fresh-pressed olive oil club, TJ's willing to send you a full-size bottle, it's worth $39, of one of the world's finest artisanal olive oils for just one little dollar to help him cover shipping. Best of all, there's never a commitment to buy anything. You can cancel your membership at any time. So you go and get your free $39 bottle for just $1 in shipping and taste the difference that freshness makes. Go to harvestfreshnow.com, harvestfreshnow.com for a free bottle and pay just that little itty bitty dollar in shipping. harvestfreshnow.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.